I I love reading about ships and sailing. Right now I'm on this kick about sailing in the 18th century vast Atlantic world. And I love reading about it, but I have absolutely no interest in actually doing it. I prefer to have my feet firmly on the ground, on the earth, on soil. And so you'll appreciate the irony of this, that there was once upon a time I was rector of a church in Annapolis. And for those of you who don't know it, Annapolis, home of the U.S. Naval Academy, describes itself as the sailing capital of the United States. As locals like to say, it's a drinking town with a sailing problem. Early in my tenure there, I said in a sermon, what I opened this one with, that I was a landlubber and that I would much rather head for the mountains than I would the sea on a vacation. I'm not sure anybody remembered a thing I said in that sermon. I don't remember the text or the point that I was making, but they sure did remember that. And the reason I know they remembered that is because I never got another invitation to go sailing again. This story from the gospel reading today, this sailing story, is fascinating. I don't know what actually happened out there on the water that night. I don't know if anything happened at all. But the story is exactly that. It's a story that teaches us truths about the spiritual life. Last week, we heard a gospel story in which Jesus feeds 5,000 people. Again, whether that's exactly how it went down or not is not the point. The story of the feeding is about God. In the ancient Jewish imagination, God brings forth abundance of food in the wilderness. Think about that manna business, as they're in the desert going from Egypt to this promised land. 40 years, they're eating this manna. So when Jesus feeds people in the wilderness, abundantly feeds them, the writer is saying God is here among us. The same thing's happening in this story, which actually comes right after that one. In the ancient Jewish imagination, God's opening act of creation is controlling the waters of chaos. Controlling the sea is a sign of God's presence and power. When the author of this story has Jesus walking on the water and hushing the tumult, the message is that God is among us. That's what's going on in this story on a macro level. The story is also intriguing on a micro level as well. So often preachers focus our attention on Peter. And goodness knows I've preached my share of those sermons. Peter gets out of the boat in the storm, walks on the water toward Jesus. He gets distracted by the weather, takes his eyes off of Jesus, and then sinks. Jesus rescues him, and all is well. Spiritual lessons in that interpretation are numerous, and they are solid. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Have faith. Jesus will catch you when you step out in faith. Don't let the storms of life blow you off course. You get the point. You could spin all of these out yourself. I want to offer a different take on it. I don't think the message is about getting out of the boat in faith and walking toward Jesus. I think the point of the passage is to stay in the boat. Now, as I confessed a few moments ago, I don't know anything about boating and boats. But one thing I do know is that rule number one of boating is to stay in the boat. Get out of the boat, you are no longer boating, you are floating. Think about it for just a second. Where was Jesus headed in this story? He was going to the boat. He was going to the boat to get in it. He was going to get in the boat with everybody else. And we know that because at the end of the story, where's Jesus? He's in the boat. When we hear his words to Peter at the end, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I think we are so conditioned to hear those words in response to Peter's failed attempt at walking on the water. And maybe that's right. But if that is right, it also has to be equally true that those words of Jesus apply to not staying in the boat as well. Why did you doubt it was me walking on the water towards you? Why didn't you have faith enough to stay in the boat and trust that I would be there with you? Early Christians were great graffiti artists that wherever they went, they left behind graffiti as a sign to one another that they had been there. One of the earliest Christian signs was a boat. They drew it, they etched it into rocks, little stick figures of boats. The boat said more to them at that point than the symbol of the cross. Stay in the boat. That doesn't mean you don't speak up or challenge the status quo or change the direction of the boat even. Think about the great prophets of old, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Ezekiel. They all stayed in the boat. They all remained connected. They stayed part of that larger vision, the larger project of what God was doing. I feel this strong pull, almost like I have to say the word community here, that word that we use so often. I feel like I have to use that word to describe what's happening in the boat, and it's definitely there and it's very important, but I'm not sure that's all that's going on here. I think that the boat is about the way of faith, the spiritual path, the larger journey toward God. Yes, there are other people in the boat, and yes, we have to have each other to get there, but there's more to it as well. I had some wonderful conversations this week with parishioners. And in one of them, it was a real heart-to-heart conversation about our faith and our affiliation with the church. And I heard myself say this out loud, that if I am truly honest with myself, there are times in my life, particularly when I'm around secular people, there are these times, these moments that I'm embarrassed about my association with the church, about being on this path of faith. I don't want them to see the boat that I travel in. My experience in this congregation is that I'm not the only one who feels that. Part of the reason for my unease is that secular people tell me that I'm just looking for comfort, that I'm looking for safety in my faith. But when I hear them say that kind of stuff, I think it's just the secular equivalent of saying, get out of the boat, engage in some narcissistic exercise to show how self-aware and free-thinking you are. What they don't realize and what I sometimes forget is that there is nothing safe about being in a small boat at night on the Sea of Galilee in a storm. There is nothing safe about following some dude who has a price on his head. There is nothing safe about loving your enemies. There is nothing safe about saying, I want to die to myself and live to a higher purpose. Staying in the boat is a lot more risky and a lot more rewarding than getting out and trying to walk on water. And it requires a heck of a lot more humility. Staying in the boat doesn't mean that we have to like everything about the boat. It means that we've decided. It means that we have made a decision. That we have made a decision to channel our spiritual impulses in this direction, in this way, in this tradition, with these people. You of little faith, why did you doubt? He asks. When I hear him say that, I hear him asking, why did you get out of the boat? Faith is not about walking on water. It's about staying in the boat.